Hello miners and miners, Aaron here, back with another video. Kachina is the first Geo 4-star we can obtain in the game since Inazuma released Genshin. That happened almost 2.5 years ago now, so was Kachina worth the wait? Before I answer that question and many others, I just have to say that if you do end up liking my content, why not take a bite out of that sopapilla cheesecake flavored subscribe button down below. Also note that for this video, I will mention the new Night Soul mechanics, what they are, and how they're utilized when they become relevant. But with that out of the way, let's drill our way right into the overview. Kachina is a sub-DPS buffing support who focuses on doing her job by activating the Crystallize reaction. Kachina's skill allows her to enter the Night Soul state, which is a special state for Natlan characters that give them specific synergies. In this state, Kachina will gain a Night Soul meter to track her Night Soul points. Upon using her skill, she will summon her Turbo Twirly, which she can mount and dismount while active, and her Night Soul meter is instantly maxed out too. Turbo Twirly will deal damage while it's active in two ways, depending on if Kachina is riding it or not. If she is, then it will deal AoE Geo damage based on her defense when using a normal attack, but if not, then it will deal AoE Geo damage based on her defense once per 2 seconds. In each case, each instance of damage will drain her Night Soul meter by a 6th. When her Night Soul meter is depleted, Turbo Twirly disappears. Other things to note is that Kachina can ride Turbo Twirly for up to 65 seconds or 50 seconds if climbing, and each instance of skill damage has a 2/3 chance to generate 1 Geo particle. Kachina's burst deals AoE Geo damage based on her defense, and it creates a field that buffs Turbo Twirly. While Turbo Twirly is active, field will increase the area of effect of its attacks, and it will have increased movement speed while Kachina is riding it. Additionally, if Turbo Twirly is active while her burst is used, it will summon Turbo Twirly to Kachina's side, but will not refresh its duration. Kachina's Ascension passives are simple buffs to her kit. Her first increases her Geo damage by 20% for 12 seconds whenever Night Soul Burst is triggered, which would usually only be triggered by Kachina once per rotation. And then there's her fourth Ascension passive, which increases the base scaling of Turbo Twirly by 20% of Kachina's defense. For Kachina's talent priority, her scaling is pretty equally split between her skill and elemental burst, with a slight emphasis on her skill, so leveling her skill and burst together is best. Her normal attacks you can ignore though, as they scale with a different stat than the rest of her kit, and they have low scalings. Moving on to Kachina's combos, which are the same as most other off-field units. Simply use her skill to summon it, and then use her burst for the AoE damage if you need it. There are more ifs to this, but that's the basic way to play her. If you don't have her burst, then you can just use her skill. If you have her C2, you can use her as a main DPS for 2 attacks, and then use her burst, or vice versa. You could also use her skill, then swap to her again before the main DPS and use her burst to extend her uptime with her C2. And there's even more ifs, but all matter very little to Kachina's overall potential. As with all 4 stars, Kachina's Constellations could be considered as an extension of her kit, but how good are they overall? Kachina's first constellation grants her 3 energy whenever an ally collects a crystallized shard, but this can only occur once per 5 seconds. Additionally, every time she mounts or dismounts her Turbo Twirly, she will collect all crystallized shards in an area around her. This will end up leading to about 12 extra energy for her passively, enabling her to run 25 to 35% less energy recharge than she might have wanted to before. This constellation would reduce her energy requirement by 4 to 7 substats worth of energy recharge, which she could now put into more desirable stats. However, using her burst was never mandatory since a lot of Kachina's potential relies on her skill, so it ends up being a nice energy benefit to make her more consistent against AoE content, but that's really it. Kachina's second constellation regenerates 1/3 of her Night Soul point bar. Additionally, if there is no Turbo Twirly on the field, her burst will summon one. This can either do nothing for her if sticking to a strict rotation, or it could end up increasing her Turbo Twirly's uptime by 4 seconds. This can be good in some situations, but it can also mean next to nothing for her total value as a character, making it rather underwhelming. Kachina's C3 increases the level of her skill by 3. This is her main damage source, but since her Ascension 4 passive grants her a flat amount of scaling, she doesn't get too much more from the additional levels. Kachina's C4 grants the current active party members in her burst field a defense bonus based on the amount of enemies within this field. This defense increase starts at 8% and increases by 4% for every extra enemy within the field, capping at 4 enemies at 20% defense. This bonus is honestly pretty bad, as it equates to less than half a defense main stat at max. On average, you'll see around a 12 to 16% defense bonus for the on-field character, which is nothing, even for defense scalers like Ito. It's so useless right now that it's practically ignorable and should instead be considered a small buff to other units' shield. Kachina's C5 increases the level of her burst by 3. This ends up leading to a decent overall damage increase, though it's nothing phenomenal. Kachina's C6 grants her the ability to deal AoE geo damage, scaling based on 200% of her defense when a nearby shield is replaced or destroyed, and this effect can only occur once every 5 seconds. This constellation is where a large amount of her damage resides, since it is passive AoE geo burst damage. However, it does have a shield regen requirement. This should not be super difficult to fulfill, since Crystallize shards do count as shields, and Kachina will cause the reaction pretty reliably. This effective 800% defense multiplier per rotation is huge, and it shows as it will make up to about half of Kachina's overall damage output. All around, Kachina's constellations are not all that necessary to her kit. Her best are her 6th due to the large damage boost to her kit that makes her an actual sub DPS, and her 1st, which reduces her energy requirement pretty significantly. However, neither of these buffs seriously impact her main function, which is held behind one of the new artifact sets being added into the game. Speaking of, in terms of artifacts, Kachina has one that is significantly better than all others due to its absurdly strong buffing potential. Kachina's best and basically only artifact option available to her is the Scroll of the Hero of Cinder City set. This thing offers her 6 energy whenever Night Soul Burst is triggered, and will also grant the entire team a 40% damage bonus, the elemental types responsible for the reaction that the wearer triggers. So if the wearer triggers Electrocharged, the team gets a 40% Hydro and Electro damage bonus. If the wearer triggers Burgeon, then the team receives a 40% Pyro, Dendro, and Hydro damage bonus. Kachina can only trigger the Crystallize reaction, which means that she can grant the entire team a 40% Geo damage bonus, plus either a 40% Hydro, Pyro, Electro, or Cryo damage bonus. This might have the caveat that the wearer needs to be in the Night Soul state in order to gain the max benefit of the two-piece, but the scroll set will prove to be one of the most powerful, valuable, and versatile buffing support sets in the game, even without the max benefit. When at max benefit, the 40% team-wide damage buff is so huge that there is no point in using anything else even on Kachina. For her stat priority, since Kachina has no good scaling other than her C6's skills and bursts defense scaling AoE damage, the main stats she should focus on are defense percent on the sands, geo damage percent on the goblet, and crit on the circlet. Since she has good scaling but poor base stats, Kachina wants to focus on defense first and foremost in her substats. The goal is to reach around 2100 defense. After that, you want to focus on her energy recharge and crit ratio, which will change slightly depending on the weapon and whether she's against AoE content or not. As a good guideline, build into energy recharge first. Here she has 4 different energy requirement goals to reach, but 155% is a good stopping point for most situations. Before C1, you will want to aim for 160% with Favonius Lance and 195% without. After C1, her energy needs drop dramatically to the point that they can be completely covered by Favonius Lance, and or they'll drop to 155% without it. After that, focus on a 1-to-2 crit ratio to maximize her damage output. When it comes to weapon options, support units usually like supportive weapons over any others, and Kachina is no different. However, since there is a lack in supportive polearms, and since her own damage output is relevant to the team's overall damage, Kachina only really has 3 polearms to choose from. First off is Favonius Lance, which is still the only actual good supportive polearm in the game. It offers Kachina enough energy generation to ignore the energy recharge stat in its entirety, while also allowing her to battery her team better. Because of these 2 specific cases, it will be her best in slot polearm when supporting burst reliant characters. This weapon is not even too far behind her others in terms of her own personal damage, so if using her before C6, where most of her personal damage is unlocked, then this polearm will be her best available. Print of the Rainbow is next, and it's her best free-to-play option available. This is because of the monstrous 83.73% defense it offers, which goes directly toward Kachina's personal damage output. However, it offers nothing other than damage, making it only good if you plan to use her for damage. Since Favonius Lance offers more energy and therefore more damage stats to allies, using Footprint will usually lead to a minor team DPS loss in most cases. Deathmatch is in a similar state as Rainbow, as it only offers her damage. However, it offers her a mix of crit and the occasional defense percent. This polearm will usually perform about on par with Rainbow or better, depending on if she gains the defense percent in the passive. That means that, again, it will usually lead to a minor team DPS loss in most cases. Kachina is a unit that focuses on buffing her team by triggering the Crystallize reaction. So when it comes to synergies, you'll find that some of her best pairs are the units that also work well in these teams. Chiori is great alongside Kachina because she completely buffs Chiori's damage. Kachina not only provides a construct in Turbo Twirly, but she also offers Chiori a strong offensive 40% damage buff due to the new Scroll Artifact set. Kachina additionally offers Chiori a defense percent buff in her C4, which, though low, would end up increasing burst damage by a decent amount. They would also unlock Geo Resonance for each other to use, increasing their damage by a massive amount. On top of that, they're both not strictly reliant on mono Geo teams, as they can work just as well or even better alongside other elements. Navia is another unit that pairs well with Kachina due to each of them pairing well with Crystallize. Navia requires Crystallize to deal the damage she should be dealing, while Kachina needs Crystallize to buff the team, generate energy, and deal a large amount of burst damage. Kachina also benefits from Navia's ability to pull in Crystallize shards in order to make her more consistent. Kachina works best alongside both of these units, more than many others, to the point that she should always be paired alongside them. So when mentioning team options, you'll find that they will usually be right at her side since they are such a good core. Alongside Navia is up first, since it's where Kachina will work best. This is because Kachina's kit reaches its peak in the same crystallized comps that Navia works in. In Navia's peak team, Kachina pops off as she's able to buff both Navia and Furina with a 40% damage bonus buff. On top of that, her addition activates Geo Resonance for both Navia and Kachina to utilize. All of this enables Kachina so well that she will end up performing about just as well or better than Zhongli. Mono Geo is another spot that Kachina works well in due to her team-wide buffing. However, Mono Geo normally has a lot of defense scalers, and Kachina cannot buff all of their defense, only their damage percent. This is good, but it's nowhere near as powerful as Goro's buffs, and she does not offer enough damage to compete with Chiori. She also requires Crystallize to activate most of her potential, which Mono Geo does not have consistently. There are a lot of downsides to her in these teams, but if there is ever a situation in which she would work, she'd be a pretty good support DPS hybrid. The last type of comps to mention are those where she works as a crystallized buffer. One of the best of these is when she's used as a double Geo core in Walnut related teams. I know it's been a long time since this has been recommended since it has gotten power crept, but this core, while not insanely strong, is still super versatile as it can be used alongside any comp that isn't Breeze or Bloom related. However, another option is to drop the second Geo unit entirely to use Kachina as a versatile team-wide buffing support. She won't be as strong as an Animo unit for this job, but she would still be decent. Now, with everything all said and done, let's move on to Kachina's rating. Kachina's damage overall is honestly not bad. While her single target damage is lacking quite a bit, her AoE is where she really shines. All around, when unbuffed, her damage would be at its worst a 2, but when she is buffed, her damage can reach at most a 3. However, on average, she will usually be at a 2.5 out of 5 for damage output. In terms of application, she's Geo, so a 0 out of 5. For offensive utility, she really only has the Scroll Artifact set to utilize. One artifact set isn't a lot, but a 40% team-wide damage percent buff is very strong. The only downside is that she needs to be paired with elements that can be crystallized, which can be rather limiting. She has nothing other than this set though, which I think earns her an average 2.5 out of 5. For battery potential, Kachina can pretty reliably generate about 5 particles per rotation. This is quite a lot, and thankfully, she usually pairs well in teams that have other Geo units. Additionally, one of her better weapons is the Favonius Lance, which will help her generate even more energy. She has the potential to generate a large amount of energy for her team, which I think earns her a solid 2.5 out of 5 for battery potential. In terms of defensive utility, she can easily apply shields to allies from the Crystallize reaction, and she can offer her on-field units some extra defense. But while neither of these things really help, they do offer a little bit of defensive utility, earning her a 0.5 out of 5. For flexibility and versatility, Kachina encompasses a lot. Her main role is a sub-DPS buffer, which is 2 of the main roles in the game, but she can also be played as a main DPS, though it's not that good. She also can be used in many of the compositions currently in the game. The only ones that she cannot be used well in are spread, freeze, and physical teams. Even certain bloom teams are decent for her, though they are not ideal. Everywhere else, she works decently, which is pretty good. All of this combined earns her an oddly good 3 out of 5 rating. However, with her best score mattering the least, Kachina has no strong overall score. Instead, she earns a rather low 1.5 out of 5 stars. Kachina may be versatile and she may offer a good team-wide buff, but she's lacking in personal damage, she's Geo, she's lacking in defensive options, and she can only buff certain units. While this isn't terrible, as she's a pretty decent generalist option for those that are lacking a premium one, she's unable to excel at anything worthwhile. Instead, it seems much more likely that she was specifically made as a free-to-play option to make Natlan exploration a bit easier. But those are just my thoughts on Kachina. Now I want to hear yours. What do you think of Kachina? Do you plan to use her? What teams do you plan to use her in? Will you try to turn her into a main DPS? Tell me your thoughts about Kachina in the comments below. But with that, I will skedaddle. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Bye bye!